Hello and welcome to Looting in Sliver, the 19th video as part of our Red Team Fundamentals mini-series. One common theme during Red Team assessments that you will notice is that you will occasionally find sensitive files. These files may contain credentials, API keys, or other secrets that may be leveraged during a Red Team assessment to move laterally, compromise additional systems, or if you are lucky, entire domains. Now, because you will most likely not be the only operator as part of that assessment, you will want to share your findings with fellow operators. There are several ways in which this can be achieved. However, by far the best and most collaborative method is by using Sliver's looting capabilities, and this video will cover everything you need to know about it. As per usual, everything we teach in this video is purely for educational purposes. We take no responsibility for your actions. As you participate in more Red Team assessments, you will find that discovering sensitive files, which may be storing domain account passwords or other credentials, will become particularly valuable. They may help us and our Red Team members move closer towards the common goal, becoming one step closer towards domain compromise. However, there is no worse feeling than losing access to such discoveries. As such, we need a storage mechanism for such information. Traditionally, spreadsheets were a common means of tracking such information. For every new finding, a new record would be added and the spreadsheet shared across the team. However, this approach resulted in several issues, such as the misplacement of the document becoming outdated as it may not be regularly updated across the team, and perhaps most significantly, it becoming compromised, in which case we would have a lot of legal issues to deal with. To counter this problem, Sliver provides a loot store that is maintained within the C2 server. It tracks all identified intelligence of interest, enabling the sharing and updating of information amongst operators in real time, as well as eliminating the need to maintain a separate static document of all findings. Therefore, by maintaining such a shared and distributed database, our assessments can be better tracked and thus more efficient, enabling a more effective and collaborative environment. Now, we don't actually need to install any additional tools to enable Sliver's loot store, and we can leverage it directly through an implants interface. So let's actually take a look at this in more detail. So the main command that you will use to perform all of your looting operations will be loot. And then each operation has its own argument that controls the specific looting operation being performed. And the most fundamental of these arguments is remote. Now, what this argument does is essentially fetches a remote file from the current implant session and stores that file as part of the Sliver's loot store. And most of the time, this will be the main argument that you use to loot given files. Now, as you'll see here in its help menu, the main argument that you need to provide is simply the path of the file that you are fetching. Now, because these files can differ between, well, a given file, a file can be both a binary file and a textual file. And you can specify this type of file that you are looting with the F switch. Now, Sliver actually does a good job at determining the specific file type being saved, but in the case that it doesn't, you can just use the F switch to specify instead. And I believe the way it does so is by giving extension. So naturally .exe will be saved as binary, and then something like .txt or .conf will be saved as a textual file. Now, you can also specify a name for your piece of loot. And then lastly, you can specify a specific loot type. And this differs between the file type and the loot type, because the file type will determine the type of the file, and then the loot type will determine the type of the loot. So whether that loot is a credential or simply a generic file. Now, for the most part, you won't need to specify any of these switches unless you want to, and it's simply a matter of using loot, remote, and then specifying the path to the file that you want to loot. So in this case, you can see that we are looting a file named password. And once looted, you'll see that we get a nice little message. And then most importantly, we get that loot's unique identifier. Now, this unique identifier essentially uniquely identifies the specific loot type, and for the most part, you won't really need to use it, but it just helps differentiate between all of your looted files. And in the case that you get two looted files that both have the same name, this ID will help you differentiate between them. Now, in the case that you find a set of credentials within a file or configuration, whatever that may be. You can also manually add a set of credentials to the server's loot store. And the way you do so is by using the creds argument. And just keep in mind that this only works for a set of credentials. And as you'll see there in its usage, we don't actually need to specify any additional set of command line arguments. And it's typically just a case of running loot creds. Now, as you'll see, once the command runs, you'll be prompted to select the specific credential type being added. And you can add an API key, and you can also add a user password. Now, I'll leave the API key type for yourself to explore, but we'll just use user password. And then we will need to specify a given name for the credential. So I'll just name it domain creds. Then we'll need to specify a username. And as my username is vvolkov, I'll add vvolkov. And then also the password, which will be this password that we discovered right here. So I'll just copy that, paste that in, and then once more we will get a message indicating that the loot has been added, and then additionally we will get that loot's unique ID. Okay, so how do we actually list all of the looted files? Well, that's simple. All we need to do is simply use the loot command with no arguments whatsoever. And then once executed here, you'll see that we get a listing of all of our looted items. As you see here, we have two different files named password. One of these files, or it's actually the same file, I looted before the video, just to show you that you can have two of the same names of a given loot, but every single file here, or every single loot, sorry, will be assigned a unique ID. Now, as you see here, we have two different types. We have file and also we have a credential, and we can actually filter between the specific loot type when we are listing our loot using the F switch. So if we use loot with the F switch and we specify an argument of file, it will only print out the loot contents that are files. And then if we use the cred argument instead, it will list all of the looted contents that are credentials. And you'll also see here that it expands some of the data here. So we have the clear text username value, we have the clear text password value, and then also obviously we have its UID. And we can also fetch a given loot item manually, and the way we do so is by using the loot fetch argument. And as you'll see here, all that it requires is simply the argument of fetch. So once run, you'll see here that we are given a selection of the specific piece of loot that we want to view. And once selected, you'll see here that we get its clear text contents. Now, when you no longer need a given loot item, you can use the RM argument to remove that piece of loot from the server's loot store. And as you'll see there in its usage, all that it requires is simply the argument of RM. And once ran, you'll see here we are given all of our looted items, and then we can select whichever loot item we want to remove. So to remove this duplicate, I'm actually going to remove the password.txt file. And once executed, the loot is removed. And if we use the loot command as is once more, you'll see that we are only left with the two files. Now, it is also worth mentioning that you don't actually need to use the loot command to loot given items, and several commands of Sliver support the capabilities of looting items through those commands. So say for instance you are browsing a system or you're performing some sort of enumeration and you manage to stumble upon an interesting file, you can use the cat command or whatever other command supports the capabilities of looting to loot that item. And universally throughout these commands, the way we do so is by using the X switch or the loot switch. And all that it will do is it will save that given output as loot. So to demonstrate this, let me actually remove both of these earlier looted items. And if we list the contents of this directory here, you'll see that we have a file named password. Now, if we use cat to view the contents of this file, you'll see here that we have a credential, or more specifically a password. Now, to loot that credential through the use of cat, we can simply use the uppercase X switch, and you'll see here that we not only get the item now looted, but we also get its plain text content presented to us. And again, really it is just a convenience feature, but then again, it's also worth knowing. And that will do it for looting in Sliver. I hope that this video was informative, and hopefully now you can move away from those antiquated means of saving loot using spreadsheets. As you saw, Sliver provides a far more efficient and secure means of doing so. I have also left a cheat sheet that summarizes all of the operations we discussed, and you can find a link to it down in the description below. In the next few videos, we will examine Sliver's methods for executing third-party tools, beginning with execute assembly. Although the Armory provides a wealth of tools, you will often need to bring your own, and execute assembly allows us to do precisely that. In the meantime, feel free to join our Discord channel to stay up to date with us, explore our courses, soon to be released labs, and one of the finest red team courses available. I have left a link to our group in the description below. Until then, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one.